Welcome to T is for Trauma. I'm your host, David O'Connor. My guest today is Joshua Johnson, and in this episode, he talks about what it was like to grow up in households with both overt domestic violence and covert racism and religiosity, how the pressure to perform academically and contribute financially as a teenager led to depression and increasingly self destructive patterns, why his complicated relationship with his mother made grieving her passing incredibly difficult, and how he was able to reconnect with his spirituality and get his career back on track after so many challenges in young adulthood. Joshua has maturity and wisdom far beyond his 25 years, and I think this is a wonderful episode. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Joshua Johnson. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I like to open every episode with gratitude. So I wanted to thank you for coming to join me today to record. And in learning about your story, I think it is one that is very layered and takes a lot of turns, but I think something that people can learn a lot from. So I appreciate you sharing that with the audience.
Yeah, no problem.
We came to meet each other through our mutual friend, Becca DeRoque.
Yes, who is very awesome.
Do you want to explain why Becca is awesome in your eyes?
Yeah, so Becca is largely an extrovert. I actually met her through work. She's a recruiter that reached out to me and actually got my favorite job ever. So yeah, it's pretty cool. After that, we went rock climbing a couple of times, and I realized just how awesome she is. And yeah, that's how we met.
Right. Also, I should probably make it clear that I'm referring to Becca DeRoque, who appeared in episode 3 and also was very kind in sharing her story.
Yep.
And in learning about your story, I think the broad view or the end point of it would be some issues that you had with your mom and which came to the surface in her passing. But I think to better tell that story, it makes more sense to close out with that. So I wanted to go all the way back to where you grew up.
Yeah, sure thing. So I was born in New Orleans, right? And we actually got extremely lucky in moving to Texas a year before Katrina. So while I claim New Orleans, I actually grew up in Dallas, a very,
Gotcha.
very small city called Royce City. And it was a very country city. I was one of maybe like uh five five black kids in my class, all the way up until like high school.
Wow.
So it was very isolated, and I just really couldn't connect with a lot of people.
So do you have any siblings?
Yeah, so I have one older brother who's older than me by just a year. I have two younger sisters. One is 2 years younger than me, and the other is 4 years younger than me.
Okay. And are you guys close now?
I feel like I'm closest to my brother because we grew up doing a lot of things together. And we still do actually. My sisters not so much. I try and keep in contact with them, but being about 300 miles apart, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were growing up in New Orleans, what kind of things did you like to do?
Well, so my brother and I, we went to the same Catholic school, and every time we would like, get out of school, we would go to our grandma's house because our parents would be at work all the time, right? What we did was very different from what kids do today. We pretended to cook and do other things with like just random stuff outside. So like we found sticks, muds, and like peculiar rocks or leaves, and we were like, "Hey, look what I made!" And we put it in a bowl and like gave it to our grandma, and our grandma was like, "Wow, I'm not putting that on the stove, but wow."
This is maybe a reference that is lost on you, but did you ever see the movie Hook?
I have, yes.
Okay, yeah, that kind of reminds me of Hook, where they're eating the fake food and it's all based off imagination.
Yeah, we were definitely adventurous kids.
You said your parents worked a lot. What did your parents do?
So my dad was a car salesman, all the way up until we moved to Texas. My mom was a teacher, and then she was also still in school for her second master's degree. So her first was in criminal justice, and her second was in I think healthcare administration.
Gotcha. And you said mostly that you were raised by your grandparents, or at least spent a lot of time with your grandparents, right?
Yes,
Okay.
most yeah. I'd say like over 50% of my growing up was from my grandparents.
And that's your mom's parents?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mm.
And what do you remember about your relationship with them or the interactions with them? What was that like for you?
I do remember like they obviously cared about us a bunch, but sometimes they would fight, and like as kids we really didn't understand it. We were like, oh, okay, it's happening again, we should go to the other room. um but that was the extent of the relationship. They still like they still picked us up from school. They like cooked us dinner and all this other stuff. And my grandma always said, "Hey, I love y'all no matter what." That kind of stuff. My grandfather was like much more like classic man, like 6 feet tall, like kind of the man of the house kind of persona.
Right.
So, it wasn't like extremely there, but we knew deep down like, okay, he cares about us.
Yeah. You had mentioned that your mom had a somewhat complicated relationship with her dad. So your
Yes.
grandfather. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I really didn't understand it until I guess I became an adult. But I noticed it as a child. So there was one moment in high school, and this was, I say a moment, it was more like a couple of weeks to like a couple of months. But I didn't understand this at the time. But my dad just set the entire family down, and he was like, "Hey, we're not gonna bring around grandpa anymore.
Mm.
He's not gonna be allowed to visit." At the time, I wasn't really sure why, because like
What age were you about
I
it?
was about 14.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, at the time I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. He's been nothing but nice somewhat to me, or like he's always been there, like he's always been the same. So I really didn't understand like what's changed between like in 8 years or something like that, or the 14 years I've known him. Um, and it was because he was like mistreating like my mom. He was like saying really bad stuff about my dad and stuff like that. And it was like I never saw it happen, but I knew it was happening. um so I kind of just turned a blind eye to it for a really long time. I was just like, oh, that's just how he is, like he's just one of those people. um and it wasn't until I was an adult that I fully realized how bad it actually was.
You said that he mistreated your mom. What forms did that take?
As far as I know, I never saw him hit her, but I have a feeling that it happened before, and I actually confirmed that feeling, like literally maybe a month ago or something. So I knew it was happening. It was just one of those things that didn't happen in front of the kids, you
Yeah.
know.
How did you confirm that?
A relative told me,
Okay.
and I trust this relative a lot, so they were just like, "Oh yeah, this happened, like not only whenever you were in high school, but like way before that as well, like way before we even had you. Like whenever you came into this world, this was always happening."
Yeah. You had mentioned in our conversations before that this was also happening to your grandmother, right?
Yes, and I knew that for sure because as a kid, I was like, "Oh, it's happening again." So me and my brother, my sister would go to the other room. At this point, my baby, my littlest sister, wasn't really like coherent enough to understand anything. So yeah, we would take her, we would go to the other room, and we would just kind of like wait it out, turn the TV up loud, and that was it. Um, but yeah, I knew that was happening to my grandma because there was one specific moment, and I'll never get this out of my head. Um, my grandma was threatening to leave, and she was like packing up everything. And as she was exiting, like my grandpa tried to grab her, and it was a whole thing. She like she pulled out a knife, and
Wow.
it was a like it was very shocking to me because like
Yeah.
at that point I was still a kid. I was like I haven't seen this before. What is this?
How old are you when this happened?
I think I was so this was about 5th grade. So I'm actually not too sure how old I was in 5th
Maybe like
grade.
10 or 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So it seems like there had been this just extended cycle of violence, and maybe you did not have as much understanding of that, or it you had maybe been aware of it, but not really connected the dots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it wasn't until I say it wasn't until like college slash I became an adult that I was all aware of all these things. But it wasn't until I really met like people outside my immediate family and saw how they interacted, and I was like, wow, this is pretty chill. This is pretty cool.
In terms of the domestic violence, would that ever happen in front of you with either your grandma or your mom?
Definitely not my mom. Sometimes my grandma. So when I was a kid, like I said, we would go to my grandma and grandpa's house after school, and it was so often that we got to see everything
Right.
from like dinner to like just talking like work, financial problems, stuff like that. And yeah, and that included the domestic violence, and it never really like rubbed off on us. Like we weren't like affected by it physically, but we were mentally.
Yeah.
um
It would be hard not to be, right?
right,
Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting for sure.
Do you know, did that cycle of violence end, or was that something that just continued through
Yes,
your teens and into your adulthood?
so it ended but way late.
Yeah.
So it do you remember that story that I was just telling where in high school there was a time that like my grandpa just wasn't allowed to come over to the house?
Yeah.
Shortly after that, like we all started going to a different church, and he turned his life around. He for a while, actually no, for a very long time, and he still to this day he doesn't curse anymore.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, that's like one of the biggest changes. If you're someone that has a vocabulary that includes like curse words all the time, it's extremely difficult to go from that to like more sophisticated, like less I don't know, aggressive
Yeah.
kind of tone. So yeah, it did end. And honestly, I have the church to thank for that. He still goes to that church, and I feel like it's definitely helped. It's definitely something that's turned his life around for the better.
And do you think the instant where your grandma was threatening to leave and with the knife, that was the turning point for that?
No, so that happened like when I was in New Orleans. So that wasn't like there were a couple of times where stuff like that happened, but that was like the worst point.
Yeah.
Like that's when I was like, wait a minute, where's grandma going? Um, but yeah, it was never that bad again. And these days it's actually like so much better.
Yeah. Okay. And you said that neither you nor your siblings ever experienced anything like that with him.
As far as I know, no. No, it's always like directed towards like adults, I guess, in the
Yeah.
room. And it wasn't until I got much older that I realized, wait, I just kind of dodged a bullet. Like I am very thankful that he turned his life around before I could become an adult and fully realize like the situation that I'm in with
Yeah.
the relationship that we have.
You had mentioned previously that he had been something of a bully, though.
Yes. So growing up, I said that he affected us mentally, not physically,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what I meant by that. There was a lot of bullying. Like sometimes I would like he would pick me up from school and like watch me talk with my friends, and he would just straight up judge my friends. He'd be like, "Yeah, you shouldn't be hanging around them," and it wasn't for good reasons. It was more like, "Oh, they're not like the same skin color as you, or they're like look at how he dresses, stuff like that."
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it at the time. I was just a kid. Um, I was more concerned with playing with my brother and my friends, like trying to cook fake meals using dirt and rocks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't think of anything of it, but looking back on it, I'm like, wow, that's like not only prejudice, but also pretty racist.
Yeah. I think you had also mentioned that this was something that happened with your mom too, right? That she had somewhat instilled some racism.
Yes. So my mom, it wasn't like full on racism where it was like, oh yeah, you can't hang out with like, or you can't like date this person because they're a different color than you. It was more like, don't go in someone's house that's like anyone, no matter what race they are. But whenever we moved to that small town and there was like five other black kids, I immediately picked up, and this was like, as like a preteen, I immediately picked up that she was much more willing to go out of her comfort zone with parents who were black than with parents who were white.
Yeah.
There were two people that lived across the street from me, and I would hang out with their kids every day. One of them was white, and one of them was black, and like the black parents, they had like dinner parties and like all this other stuff. They got invited over. We went to their house a couple of times, and it was cool. But it wasn't like that with a white family that lived right next to them. And as a kid, I was closer to their kids because they would like they introduced me to Guitar Hero, which is like the coolest thing ever as a kid. So I was like, yeah, I want to go over to their house like all the time and play Guitar Hero and like, eat nachos.
Yeah.
It sounds like a great time. And then like the other family was like, yeah, we just we pray, we do our homework, and then we talk about stuff. And now, as a kid, you're like, talking? What?
Yeah. So it's a lot lower energy than what you're looking for.
Yeah. So I went to my mom and I was like, hey, can we go over to so and so's house, tomorrow night? And I was always met with, well, I don't really know their parents, so no. But I knew at the same time that she wasn't really like willing to go outside her comfort zone to actually meet them.
Do you think that had any trickle down effect to you at the time, or was that something that you were resistant to, or just kind of had an awareness that like, hey, this doesn't feel right?
Yeah, it was always something that didn't feel right to me because coming from New Orleans to like the small town in Dallas, New Orleans is like very, very culturally diverse, right? So like I went to a Catholic school where like I think, I don't know, some 35% of the population of that school was black. And there was like there was everyone there. And going from that to like this small town where I was like one of five black kids, that was like, it was really eye opening because I got to experience a culture that I haven't like experienced before. So I thought it was cool. But my parents, they grew up, and my grandparents too. They grew up during a time where it was like not okay to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
So they have prejudices that are kind of like tucked away deep inside them.
Yeah.
And my dad so far has like come to realize that, those prejudices are actually pretty bad. And he's worked towards like, clearing them and like going into anything with an open mind. And yeah, it's much better than before.
Yeah.
And he was actually always the one that was better about like, oh, that it's fine. They they can do what they want. They're kids.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, was what was his take on this stuff at the time?
Ask your mom.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I can
Yeah.
relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah. My mom definitely wore the pants in the relationship and in the house. Uh, all decisions went through her, whether it was like financial, religion, or like anything. And I totally see why. She was extremely smart. She just, had different prejudices that were very deep inside of her. And I feel like she really fully didn't realize it until I started like, hanging out with other people, and like I became an adult. I went to my mom, I was like, hey, these are my friends, and they're like, oh, that's cool. And she actually met them.
Right.
And that was a crazy part to me because usually she wasn't like, down to meet like new people. She's definitely introverted.
Yeah. Yeah. It also sounds like she had a very strong personality.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. We call her the prayer warrior of the house because she would fight every battle with prayer, and I
Okay.
was like, at the time, I was a kid, so prayer was just like, it was the same thing as a pledge of allegiance for me. where you just kind of get up, you say it, and then you sit back down and go about your day.
Right.
And I'm much more spiritual than I was before, but I'm not completely on board with it yet.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to figure things out, and yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine, given your experiences and the amount of religiosity at home when you were growing up, and then also the complicated relationship with your mom, that it must be also now complicated as an adult to navigate that relationship with religion or spirituality.
Yes. It's very difficult.
I did want to ask about high school. So what was that experience like for you?
It was pretty. So in the first half, it was absolutely horrible. Um, Going from elementary and middle school where I made straight A's to high school where I started taking AP classes and like more challenging courses.
Yeah.
I was put into an environment with kids I've never seen before, but were always in the same school. Um, and those kids, they were talented. But I'm not taking away from my own success, but at the same time, I'm like, wow, I'm amongst my people, I guess, as far as like as far as intelligence goes. So I was able to like kind of explore what does the world have to offer. And I quickly found out that the world is very dark from those people. There were a lot of scandals in our high school that I'm still learning about today. And I saw it happening around me, and I was like, that's not okay. So the first 2 years, I was like, okay, if this is what people are like, I don't really want to be around people at all.
What kind of stuff was happening?
Well, it was more like, just fights, drama, like typical high school stuff. If you've ever heard of the TV show Euphoria,
Right.
Euphoria is a perfect depiction of like a public high school. A lot of people say that, oh, that's exaggerated. There's no way people do that many drugs as kids, right? And it's not too far off from the truth.
Yeah.
So I got to witness some of that, and it was tough because I wasn't really down with that. I was definitely one of those nerdy kids that like, I did AV for a while, like Cinema 4D, Sony
Right.
Vegas, After Effects. That was my shtick.
Okay.
And I made like a couple of videos for our school class, and like that's what I like doing. And while I was doing that, the other kids, they would like ask me, "Hey, do you want to go skate?" And then like we'll smoke afterwards. And I was like, "No,
Yeah.
why would I do that? I really just want to like make cool videos, play video games, and at this point, I graduated from making fake food with rocks and sticks. But yeah, that was my thing. I was an imaginative person, so
Yeah.
I wanted to explore those things in life, and I felt like skating and smoking just wasn't that imaginative.
Yeah.
Um, and
Were you able to find your tribe at all in high school?
sort of. So yeah, actually, yeah, I'll say I did. And that's when I started cross country.
Right.
So I started cross country, and that's where my tribe was born. It was so here's a scene that I'll paint for you. First day of track tryouts in middle school, I was doing hurdles in the rain in skateboard shoes. So if you've ever done hurdles, it's grueling already.
I haven't, but it looks every bit grueling. Yeah, for sure.
So after that, I was like, okay, this is pretty tough, but like I really like the coach. Like he pushes me to like not only be a better person, but also be like a more, I guess, seasoned athlete. Like it kept me healthy, and it made me meet a lot of people. Um, After that, I was like, hurdles aren't for me. That was grueling. So I went up to cross country instead. Someone said, "Oh yeah, you don't have to run fast. You just have to run for a really long time.
Right.
And sometimes it's relaxing." And I was like, "Okay, I could go for that. I just like to, think to myself when I'm like walking around school. It should be the same thing. It was not. It was very fast, but that's okay. I got faster, and I got more comfortable with keeping a pace, and it became more imaginative.
Did you have any experiences with depression in high school?
Oh yes. So my sophomore year and freshman year, as I was like trying to figure out like how do things work, I was also slipping in my classes. I mentioned that before, and that was really grueling for me because at the time I was like, I've always succeeded. I've never experienced failure like this. So I would come home and like how the grade system at home was set up was if you made A's, you got like $5 per A, right? And then if you made B's, you get like $3 per B. There was no making C's. Making C's will put you in the negative, and you would actually get money out of your account, and that
Whoa.
would pay for bills and stuff.
Oh my God.
So as a high schooler, I was like, oh man, I'm poor and I'm stupid.
And potentially going into debt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I ditched my dreams of like buying a car in high school like really early. I was like, this is never gonna happen. Like, cause even the allowance system extended to our regular jobs. Like we had to help out around the house, like with bills and stuff, because it was 2008, and that's just what you did. Um, so I worked at Chuck E. Cheese for my first job, and a lot of that didn't go to my car or like myself. A lot of it went to bills because at the same time I was slipping in grades.
Yeah.
Cause yeah, it was hard.
And then at what point did the depression kick in?
It kicked in the middle of my work day. Actually, it was a slow day, and I was just like, dude, this sucks. Like I'm working just to go home and be more stupid and get more in debt. Like it didn't feel like I was working towards anything.
Yeah.
So I went home, had a conversation with my dad, and I was like, "Hey, I know it's tough around the house. Like I know that like I'm slipping in classes too, so like I don't really deserve like the money that I'm bringing in if I can't make up for it with success in education." That made sense to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, I really need a car, like, cause like all my friends have cars, and showing up to school and on like the bus or like in my dad's car, it was just too much for me. Like, the kids would start making fun of me. They'd be like, "Josh, aren't you like going into your junior year and you don't have a car yet?" And I would always say, "Well, I have a job and I'm working this job, so I'll eventually get one. I've been eyeing this Honda Civic for like $2,000. I should be there, but by like next semester or something." And it never happened. It didn't happen until like the later half of my senior year in high school.
Yeah. And when you had that conversation with your dad about bringing home the money and your academic track and stuff like that, what was his response to that?
He was very honest with me. He straight up said, "Well, Josh, your academic performance hasn't been great, and while that's not okay, I do want you to do better. You aren't paying bills because of your academic performance. You're paying bills because we can't. You saw that I took up a second job. Like he was at this moment he was a bank teller, and he stocked the shelves at Target like overnights, right? So he literally just had no time,
Yeah.
and it was kind of a similar situation with my mother. She was working two jobs, and she was like working on her Texas teacher certification, which is like very different from New Orleans. So she wanted to teach again. So no one had time to do anything, and no one had money, right? And that kind of extended down to the kids that could work. My brother and I, we both worked at Chuck E. Cheese, and it was while it was fun. Like I would actually look forward to working at Chuck E. Cheese. I mentioned before it was like it's now my second favorite job that I've ever had.
Right.
But I enjoyed work, but each time I would go in and it was a slow day, nothing really happening. I would think to myself like, what am I doing here? Like I'm not really getting anything out of this because I would go home and just immediately start paying bills.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was a lot of pressure to have put on you at that age. And then also just I don't know if you would call it the national mindset or the global mindset at the time, that there was a lot of doom and gloom and people were very down on themselves.
Oh yes, and I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's tough to have an awareness of, I mean, these are very adult concepts to grapple with. And it's tough to wrap your head around that at that age. Like it's, it's not apparent to you at that time that people are calling this a once in a generation meltdown. and
Exactly.
people are thinking it's the end of capitalism.
Right.
Yeah.
And I say this was 2008. This was actually like 2011. My parents were still recovering from 2008 all the way up
Right.
until like I think 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
So it definitely impacted the entire family and all the people around me for a very long time.
And then again, to just round back on the depression stuff,
Mhm.
your grades continued to slide as high school went on, or were you
Oh
able
yeah.
to kind of turn things around at any point?
Yes, it continued to slide, but for good reason. I started being more social and started interacting with people more. So I found I just didn't have time to be as institutionalized as I was before. Like before, the routine was like, okay, I I get off the bus, I immediately do homework, I eat dinner, and then I would play video games with my friends. And that was it. Now it was like, okay, you get out from school, you have to go practice for cross country, you have to go hang out with your friends right after that, then you eat dinner, and then it's already like 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, I have to wake up at like 5 in the morning. I don't know if I could like do this homework right now. And it was like it was a flood of homework. I was taking advanced classes, so it was like I think there was like at least one piece of homework for each class each day, and there were like I think 5 classes or something like that I took advanced in, and it was grueling because it was more like it wasn't work that really taught me anything. Like I'm sure I could like pick up a textbook, read through a chapter, and just be a sponge for information, right? Just soak it in. But this was like 50 or 100 problems, like 100 math problems or something. Like it's very tedious work,
Yeah.
and I had full confidence I could do it, just not to the extent that I was supposed to do it at.
Yeah.
And it started reflecting in my grades because a large part of our grading system was homework. Like I think it was like 40 or like 50% of each class. So I would go to the exams and I would be able to answer everything but the hardest questions. And the hardest questions always appeared on homework. And I would just sit, like I remember one day during an exam, I was just sitting there like tears in my eyes rolling down onto the paper. I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh my god, I feel so stupid. When did this like kind of happen?"
Yeah.
Because I've always been able to like go through every single exam 100% and always be like the first one done, and it was usually like an A or something. Now it was more like I struggled to even finish the exam.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it was tough to allocate the time to study. Like it was not a talent problem. It was mostly just finding the time to actually do it.
Right. Yeah. I feel like we we as not parents, I'm not a parent, but we as humans push our younger ones so much to do more, be more, do more of this. And that definitely reflected in the household that I grew up in. So when I told my parents I was taking like all AP classes, they're like, "Oh, that's awesome. We're gonna double your salary for each A that you get from those classes." I was like, "Cool. I'm this much closer to that car."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like with your parents being very career focused and then this added pressure of the financial crash that they were probably projecting their own, maybe, let's say, challenges onto your success and your career track.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what happened. I never felt like I was living in my parents' shadows, but I've always like aspired to be I wanna do better than my parents did, you know.
Yeah.
Um, actually no, I take that back. I I don't want to do better than my mom. Uh, but I want to at least like have the same kind of work ethic towards things.
Right. You want to do something that's more aligned with your values.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that you had started to become more extroverted and more social.
Mhm.
As you started to make more friends in high school, did that alleviate any of the depression or make life a little
Yeah.
bit easier?
It did. And it kind of like it put me up so high that once the fall came down, it was really hard.
Right.
But yeah, meeting different people that were like into the same things that I was, like I was able to discover like my favorite musician to this day, Childish Gambino, through
Yeah. He's awesome.
yeah, he's a true Renaissance man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I discovered him through one of my best friends from high school. We just ran cross country together, and he was playing this song one day. I was like, that's amazing. And all I could think was, this is my first time really falling in love with music. And that was just a whole new experience for me. And even though like it was, my parents were still recovering financially, like my job was like it was fun, but I really wasn't working towards anything, or at least that's what it felt like. I liked running with him because it was more like we got to experience different things. I got to
Yeah.
like try out different things through him.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the car crash story.
Yeah, so the car crash story. And that's part of the downfall that I just talked about. So I got I got to a good point with that friend that introduced me to Childish Gambino, and I was like, dude, I'm like struggling to keep up with you during our runs. So I'm gonna start practicing with you much earlier. He goes in like maybe an hour to 2 hours earlier than the actual practice starts.
Yeah.
And he just, runs like a quick like, I don't know, 3 or 5 miles to warm up, right? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna work towards that because I want to hang with him during our actual runs. And what happened was we had to wake up at like I think 4 a.m. or something like that. So I told my mom, I was like, hey, I gotta wake up at 4 a.m. because I'm gonna go practice cross country a little bit earlier. And she was okay with it. She was like, okay, I'll wake you up, but you have to get up because as a high schooler, I had a hard time getting out of bed. It was just so grueling for me. It was like, again.
Yeah. I mean, especially at those hours, right?
Yeah. So yeah, at that point, I was like, okay, I'll get up at 4 a.m. for the sake of, hanging out with this friend. But there was one day, I think I had some kind of argument with my parents. It was so it was so minuscule that I completely forgot what it was about to this day. I just know that I was really mad at them for some reason. And I woke up at 4 a.m. and waking up at 4 a.m. is already like really grueling, right? So I woke up and like the usual wake up sequence is they would turn on my bedroom lights just immediately, not even say anything.
Cool.
So I would see that through my closed eyelids, and I was just like, oh, it's happening again. I thought I had like at least 2 more hours. And my mom would like, start screaming because like, she would start screaming like, hey, wake up. And I was like, I was hard of hearing. I really couldn't hear her, so it was totally understandable. But I just woke up even more pissed off. And this was like during the cold of winter. It was really dark outside. And I was also like learning how to drive, right? So what the routine was is my dad would take me to school in his car, right? And I was considered one of the cool kids now because I would drive to school in my dad's Mercedes
Right.
that he couldn't afford. Um, but yeah, I drove to school in that, and then immediately right after that, he would like go off to work, and I always told my friends like, no, it's not my Mercedes, but one day. But this one day, I woke up really pissed off. We were driving along the highway, right? And I was going like 90, right? I was doing full on road rage, like not talking, not saying a word, right? And my parents knew I was mad. I was mad. They were mad. It was a whole thing, right? So we're exiting the off ramp, and there's like it's 4 a.m., but there's like people out and about, like coming from work, going to work, or the
Right.
people like going to soccer practice really early, or like going to some sports activity really early, right? And everyone kind of saw this happen. I was exiting the ramp at 90 miles per hour, and as soon as you exit the ramp, right, there's a stop sign that you have to come to, and I didn't really stop. I just kept going. And it wasn't until I was like 50 feet away from the stop sign that clicked in my brain. Oh my god, I'm headed for the stop sign. I'm not stopping at it. I'm heading for that and into a ditch.
Wow.
And at this point, I don't really know what happened. It's really just like a black spot in my memory.
Yeah.
Like the time that I exited the ramp and well no, the time between I got on the highway and the time that I came to a full stop at that stop sign, it's all a black spot. But the things I do remember is my dad like grabbed me. He didn't want to grab the wheel because it was like 90 miles per hour, and
Yeah.
you're not gonna you're not gonna do any justice at 90 miles per hour grabbing the wheel. I remember my dad grabbed me. He was like, "Josh, what are you doing? Are you gonna kill us?" And like I was like, I snapped out of it. I was like, "Oh." And then I looked at my dad and I realized tears were rolling down my eyes, and like I was so lost. I had no idea what just happened.
Did you end up crashing or just
No, we came to a stop and it sounded like it was a Mercedes, so it had like really good brakes.
yeah.
Think I was able to come to a stop, but it was it was definitely one of those moments where everyone kind of saw in the immediate vicinity.
Yeah.
So like rumors started flying around the school, and like I showed up to practice still crying, and my friend that introduced me to Childish Gambino, he wasn't very empathetic really, so he didn't ask what was going on. I just like kind of dried up my tears, and we went out and ran. And I when you cry, like it's hard to breathe sometimes. So in running, I just couldn't keep up with him, and I just kind of like found a little spot in the woods, kind of sat down and collected my thoughts, cried for a minute, and then I skipped the rest of the practice. Like not even the pre-practice. I skipped the pre-practice and the rest of the practice. Went into the locker room and just stayed in there the entire time.
Yeah.
And that was like a good 3 hours or so.
Yeah.
So after that, I saw my friends and like the rest of the team come back in, and they were like, "Hey, Josh, yeah, we heard something happened. What's going on?" And I didn't know,
Yeah.
so like, I just kind of told them, yeah, I woke up, and I was really mad before, but now I'm very sad, and I'm not really sure why. And yeah, the rumors started flying around school. Like people were like, "Oh yeah, I saw this like I saw the Mercedes that Josh usually drives to school, like go 90 off the highway and then come to an immediate stop." There was like one group of kids that were like, "Oh, that's fucking awesome," and there was another group of kids that were like, "Is he okay?"
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where the depression started, because then because of that, a lot of people looked at me differently.
Yeah.
My best friend at the time, the one who introduced me to Childish Gambino, he started distancing himself, and to this day, we don't talk anymore. And it started with that day, actually.
Yeah. I'm curious, just you got on the highway, did you immediately start going 90? Or was this like something that kind of picked up
It
as you
was
neared the exit?
it was definitely something that picked up, but not near the exit. Like I felt like I was, for lack of better terms, I was definitely in a trance,
Yeah.
in a sense, where I was like put on the gas, and I really didn't feel like I was going that fast. I didn't feel anything. So I was numb to everything around me.
Yeah.
So things, I guess my inner thoughts took over, and that's when I realized what I was doing at that stop sign. I was like, "Oh, okay."
And what was the fallout with your dad, like in the immediate aftermath and then in the days, weeks, months after that incident?
I think they immediately realized that something was wrong. Not like a typical something is wrong, but like Josh has like deeper problems than just like, something that we can solve with like a simple punishment or like
Right.
taking away an allowance.
Yeah.
And from that point on, they were both like very cognizant of how I feel about things. And I don't know if I don't know if that's what pushed it really. No, that's definitely what pushed us to that point. But I look back on it, and I feel like if I communicated maybe a little bit differently, I could have gotten Oh, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I do remember that conversation that we had that made me so mad. It was about the car, that I wanted so badly.
Yeah.
All my friends were like, "Hey, you're driving this Mercedes around every day, but like, you don't own it, do you?" And I was like, "No, I don't, but I'm working on getting my own car." And we sat down, and that was that conversation where my dad was like, "Realistically, you're probably not gonna get a car until you graduate high school. Maybe you'll get one like first year or second year of college." And I fell asleep thinking, I'm just gonna be stuck in the same situation where I work towards nothing for like a good portion of my life.
Yeah.
And that just kind of made me really, really mad. So yeah, I guess that's where that day came from.
Yeah, it sounds like an extension of this kind of cycle of futility that you had been experiencing in the time before that too, right? With the grades and working
Yeah.
and all that.
I definitely felt like working towards anything was pointless at that moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's I guess right after that incident, my parents talked with me. They were like, "Yeah, you definitely have something wrong with you outside of like, what typical people deal with." So, yeah, they became more cognizant. They were much more open-minded to like the life path that I want to take. And yeah, that didn't something like that never happened again until like my I think sophomore year of college.
Did they make any broader changes in reaction to that? Like, did they offer to bring you to a therapist or anything like that?
No, and at the time therapy wasn't nearly as big as it is today.
Yeah.
So it was like they brought me to church and that was a therapy.
Sure.
But like I wasn't like, I was a high schooler and at that time, like I said before, prayer to me was like a pledge of allegiance.
Yeah.
So it was more like, oh, just go say what you need to say and that's it. I really never connected with what stories were being told. They really didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, that was their version of therapy. But it obviously it really didn't help.
Okay, so you finish out high school. How did things finish with high school? Were you able to get your academics back on track?
Not to where they were before, for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, I graduated high school. I don't remember my GPA, but I do remember I did not make it into a special part of the graduation that they reserve just for people with good GPAs.
Yeah. And then, how is college for you?
Yeah, I found a new social circle that I actually just saw yesterday. I still keep up with them, and I think that's like the coolest thing ever to like have friends that you stay in contact with over the course of like decades.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I enjoyed my freshman year. So freshman year was pretty cool. Then I transferred schools. I mentioned before I transferred schools to Texas Tech.
From A&M, right?
Yeah, from A&M Commerce.
Okay.
And Trent,
What was the reason for the transfer?
I felt like I went to the computer science classes that they offered there, and I felt like I was definitely not on track to where I wanted to be in my career. So like a lot of the people that graduated from that program, they went off to work with defense contractors. And as a computer scientist, working with a defense contractor meant you're going to use really old technology, and the work culture isn't as like quote unquote fun
Yeah.
as like the rest of the tech space.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, I didn't want that for myself. So I was like, I'm gonna make a conscious decision to go to a school that do produce people that go to those places and try and learn from the people around me. So much like that transition into high school, I transferred schools and it got so much harder.
Okay.
Everyone was so much smarter. I started dating this girl that previously did an internship at like NASA, and then she was like also a dual degree and all this other stuff. And like she was my homie. Um and everyone was like her.
Yeah.
Like everyone was like, let's do the best that we can as far as education goes. And I tried. Um, actually, no, I won't say I tried. I definitely did. Um, I I got involved with student organizations and eventually became the president and the organizer for one of the bigger ones on campus. And just like high school, I saw a lot of my time was being taken up being social and like doing things for other people.
Yeah.
And then my grades started to slip again.
Yeah.
My freshman year in college, I made all A's. My sophomore year, it was like A's, couple of B's. And then my junior year, it was like, oh crap, I'm failing classes again.
Yeah.
This hasn't happened in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely the hardest time for me because at the same time I was offered an internship at one of those companies I wanted to work at, Hewlett Packard Enterprises, and this was going to be a really fun internship. It was going to be in Costa Rica. Almost everything was paid for except for housing, right?
Yeah.
So what we did is the other interns that were also from Texas Tech, we all agreed, okay, since this person's parents are rich, they're going to pay for the entire dorm, and then we'll just like repay them over like the course of the internship, like
Okay.
monthly, right? Kind of like rent.
Yeah.
So we all agreed to that, right? And last minute, I needed a passport, so I filled out the forms, did all the applications, got the job, all that kind of stuff. And I was talking with my boss. I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there in like 4 weeks or something." And I was so excited. 2 weeks before I was supposed to go over there, my parents sat down and talked with me, and my mom was like, "Hey, we're not actually no, this wasn't 2 weeks before. This was like the day that I was supposed to go over there. I went home instead because my passport hasn't came in yet."
Yeah.
And this is when I found out my parents sat me down, they showed me the passport, and they're like, "We've had this for like 3 months actually, but we didn't want you to go to Costa Rica because we feel like it's more of like a third world country and it's not really safe for you to be over there by
Oh,
yourself."
man. So that opportunity was just completely out the window.
It was actually detrimental to my career because
Yeah.
this was set up through the university, another student organization leader, as well as like some of my professors. So the first person I told was my future roommates. I was like, "Hey, I am so sorry for this, but y'all are probably gonna have to pay more per month in rent
Right.
because I can't go.
Yeah.
And you're just gonna have an empty room." And they scolded me for it. They're like, "Why are you telling us this now? It's literally like we start next week."
Yeah. But this is the predicament you had been put in.
Yeah. And I had no words. So I was like, I'm really sorry. So I let them down. And then I called my professor, I emailed the engineering department head, and I emailed my student organization peers. And I told them all that I wouldn't be doing this internship and I instead be at home like working the summer at Walmart's pharmacy,
Wow.
which I had drugs thrown at me. It was bad.
Right.
um
Yeah. I mean, especially you're on that fast career track and you're excited about this company to work for. And then the working at Walmart is like a completely different place to end up in.
right. Yeah. So that was that moment where I was like this was like that was the most depressed I've ever been in my entire life. Because I felt like again that I couldn't really get my life in order due to unforeseen, well, not unforeseen, but like things are out of my control.
Yeah.
Um. So yeah.
I'm
happened.
guessing when your parents had that conversation with you, there was no arguing the point or pleading your case or any sort of alternatives offered, right?
No, I tried, and I was like, well, the part that we're going to is like, it's a tech hub, so it wasn't, all that bad. Like,
Yeah.
there's, of course, like you have to watch your pockets, like you have to like just watch out, just be safe, that kind of stuff. And I felt like I was mature enough to do that, but they were very, I guess, protective as a child growing up, and yeah, they were then too.
Yeah. That must have been crushing.
Oh yeah. So following that, my junior year, that's when I say my grades start slipping. My sophomore year wasn't that bad. It was A's and some B's. I started failing because, again, I felt like I was working towards something for no reason at all.
Yeah.
Like I already threw away my career chances with like, my professional relationships
Yeah.
with all these different people. And I was like, I came here and I wanted to make it. I had the opportunity and it didn't happen.
And also you had been recognized for your abilities and being
Exactly.
offered the opportunity to partake in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it all went down the drain there. And that's when and this is like the first and last time that's happened. I took an attempt at my life.
Right.
So yeah, I just didn't see a point in it all. So I was like, why do any of this?
How long after this Costa Rica situation did this happen?
This was like about this was after Christmas. So this was the January. So I was supposed to go to Costa Rica in about May, right? That next year in January, after I like failed all these classes, um, I looked at myself really hard and I was like, this isn't happening. Um, and yeah, that's kind of when I just decided I'm done. Um, Obviously I'm still here, so uh, things are better now. After that semester, that's actually when my mom passed away. So like I went home, I got some encouragement to like, just finish out this school year, try not to get kicked out of school. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. I should at least finish this out and see it to the end. Maybe I'll get like a job that isn't so great, but I'll work my way up there.
Right.
Um,
If you're open to talking about it, what was the aftermath like when you attempted to commit suicide?
it was it was definitely one of those things that was like everyone was watching me at that point. My roommate at the time, my parents, my brothers, my sisters, my professors, like everyone that kind of knew me personally. And at first it was really warming because I really didn't realize like this many people had a stake in in my livelihood.
Right.
Um, and then I realized they just don't want to see anything bad happen. And while that does sound good, it's actually selfish in a way because a lot of people I realized a lot of people kind of keep you around for their own benefit, rather than the other way around. Like it's never, I wouldn't say never. It's not always like a two-lane highway with relationships.
Okay.
And that one-lane road that exists between some of those people, they called me and texted me because they needed me.
I see. And then in terms of, was there any help offered to you in terms of, again, maybe therapeutic options or what was the process like after that happened?
So the thing that I could afford was on campus therapy. And on campus therapy is complete crap.
Right.
Basically, it's they call it a pill mill.
Yeah.
Basically, you go in, you talk about your feelings, you cry a bit, and that's like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
I went to that like maybe 7 times and realized, wait a minute, they're just trying to get me out the door as soon as possible so they can prescribe me medicine, and that'll be the end of it.
So this is a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And while the medicine was like, it was numbing, uh, in the sense that like numbed the pain, like I could breathe again. But at the same time, I'm like, this isn't really solving my problems. Like I still feel really bad.
Yeah. It's more like a band-aid.
Yeah,
So I'm guessing it was antidepressants and maybe
yeah,
something else.
antidepressants.
Do you remember what you were taking?
No clue actually.
Okay.
That it was. Well, I say it's a dark time. I literally just went to therapy talked a little bit, cried a little bit, and then took the pills right after.
Yeah.
And that was like, that got me through the day.
Yeah.
That was like, that was my way of like making sure that I could like go to class the next day and not like, start breaking down.
Yeah. And then how long did that persist for?
Just that semester. So, yeah, I finished out that semester, failed almost all my classes. And yeah, right after that, I went back home, showed my grades to my parents, and they were like, at this point they were much more understanding of like how I operate emotionally.
Yeah.
So they didn't scold me. They were like, okay, Josh, how can we do better? Like what can we do to like, kind of help you through this? Because
Yeah. So they were being a little bit gentler with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
They immediately noticed like, okay, he's not failing classes because he's not competent enough. He's failing classes because he's stuck emotionally.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were much more open minded after the incident way back in high school.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the outcome of that was they encouraged me over Christmas break, and I don't know, found the second wind as far as like, wanting to do more and like wanting to be successful in my career. And I went into like I was studying throughout Christmas break. No one does this willingly. Um and I wanted to like pass all these classes I failed before.
Yeah.
So I went into the school year. I was like, okay, it's crunch time. I've gone over like the first half of the semester over the Christmas break. I can do this.
Yeah.
And then not even a week into the semester, like right in January, that's when my mom passed away.
Okay.
And at this point, the university was like, "Holy shit, that is like, that's a perfect storm."
Yeah, it's a lot for someone to deal with at that age.
Yeah, so they offered me the opportunity to just take that semester off, refunded completely, because it's really early on. There's like nothing's been done yet. And I didn't take it, regrettably. I This thing clicked in my brain. I was like, maybe if I dive into my work, I won't be as depressed
Yeah.
about all this stuff that's happening. So I tried to do that, and I ended up passing more classes than I did last semester.
Just out of curiosity, this was your junior year or your senior year?
Junior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what was it like to have your mom pass, especially with so many complicated events leading right up to that?
So since I'm extremely young at this point, I'm only 25 right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, this was like 2018 when that happened, and honestly, it was like, it was very, the feeling that I can relate to this is being in that car in high school and blacking out on the highway. Not blacking out, but like having a dark spot in my memory.
Dissociating and
Yeah.
numbing out. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. Of course, like I was really depressed. I was, bawling my eyes out at the funeral. But like at that time, the first things that crossed my mind was, she won't get to see me graduate. She won't get to see me walk across the stage, get a job, or like do all the things I've been working towards for all these years. And that crushed me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was what that was like. For like, I think all the way up until like April.
So 3-4 months at that stage.
Yeah.
And you had also mentioned that you had overall found it quite hard to grieve too, right?
Yes. I found it hard to grieve because at the funeral specifically, I can't remember what a lot of people were telling me, but I think it was some form, like they always said the same exact quote, but it was some form of, "It's gonna be okay."
Yeah.
And I was just like, I was sitting there like, why are you saying this to me? What do you mean? Like, what's wrong? Because I was at that point, I was like, I was numb to what people were telling me. I really didn't understand what that meant. And it wasn't until I was able to grieve for a second that I truly understand what they meant. They meant like it's gonna be okay when your mom can't show up for your wedding or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, it's gonna be okay whenever she can't see you walk across the stage, like see these like great things that you're going to do. And yeah, it just took a while to get to that point of understanding.
Do you think any part of that was also awareness of all that you'd been through in the year leading up to that?
No, I don't think so because a lot of people that were like the attempt at my life and like the incident during high school where I was on the highway going 90, like those stayed within the immediate circles that
Yeah.
that were affected. So
Okay.
like not a lot of people knew.
Yeah.
A lot of people still don't know, but the people that did, they did talk to me during the funeral. They were they were very gentle with it.
Yeah.
Those people I distinctly remember. They didn't say it's going to be okay. They didn't say things to comfort me. They said things to kind of ideate how to move forward. And I honestly I appreciate that much more than like I don't know what you call them, words, not words of affirmation, but like words that comfort you
Yeah.
like in hard times. I
Yeah.
appreciate the people that like help me come up with a solution to the problem at hand.
Right. And then how does your senior year finish out with college?
Um, Honestly, it went pretty well. I completed some summer classes, and actually, my favorite subject that I failed the most in was physics. I made an A in the first part of it, and I failed the second part of it twice.
Right.
I finally finished out that class, and that was like a big boss battle for me. So it was pretty satisfying. Um, and I graduated senior year. I had a job lined up right after that, and it wasn't with like paying like Google, Amazon, Facebook, but it was paying just as much, and I was able to learn a lot from it.
Yeah. What was your relationship like with your dad at that point, especially in the wake of your mom passing and then all of this going on?
So the relationship was actually becoming more distant, both physically and emotionally, because we didn't like since I was interning. I This was the first time I've spent a full year away from home.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just getting out, seeing the world, making new friends and stuff. That took up a huge chunk of my time. So I wasn't really around for my dad, my stepmom, my new stepsisters, and all my siblings. And it wasn't until I actually, graduated and like moved back to Dallas that I was able to reconnect with them. And it is so different. It is incredible. Like everyone is incredibly different at this point. And it's only been like a year and a half since I last saw them.
What do you attribute that change to?
Definitely my mom passing.
Okay.
She was the cornerstone of everyone. She was the person that you went to for advice on literally anything, whether it be like health, social stuff. Even though she was an introvert, she was surprisingly really good with people.
Okay.
Um, yeah, she was just a really helpful kind of person. And when that kind of disappeared, everyone's lives just like changed drastically. So yeah, for better or for worse, my sister started doing much better in school. My youngest sister, she stopped fighting as much. She was like a really aggressive kid before,
Yeah.
and she kind of toned down. Now it's not all like rainbows and sunshine. Like there were some times that were made tougher because we couldn't go to her for advice.
Yeah.
I.e., like the new relationship with my stepmom and her stepsisters. It was more like adding members to the family, but they felt like distant cousins for me.
Yeah. So it seems like as people got more autonomy, they were able to maybe grow a little bit or mature a little bit as people.
Exactly.
And then in terms of the relationship with your dad, it seems like that also grew and you were able to have more deep conversations with him. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. So we definitely had some really deep conversations, and it's part of the reason why I'm trying to get back into religion now. Um I figured out that a lot of things that happened in my life, I shouldn't be here today. Um and there's, I don't know. He said that there's specific things that are out of our control, and that's okay. Um During those moments, you just have to pray and hope for the best. And it seemed to work out for him. He told me the story of like how he met my mom, and like how my mom, the prayer warrior, turned his life around. He was just like me. He was never really religious.
Yeah.
And then he became religious after he met my mom.
Yeah.
And this was my first time hearing this story. So I looked at that. I gave a hard look at it, and I'm like, okay, this is very, very deep. This is very like personal. I'm surprised I've never heard this before.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of started to believe. I was like, okay, we as in my dad and myself shouldn't be where we're at today. There has to be like something at play here, and refusing to believe that is just a non-negotiable. Like I do believe in coincidence to a degree, but that much coincidence is not not common at all.
Right. And it had just reaffirmed your faith that you kind of felt distanced from.
Exactly. And I gotta be honest, things started looking up after I, like, kind of like tried to get back into religion.
Yeah.
I took a long, hard look at the last like 8 years, and I was like, okay, during this time, I wasn't really like talking to anyone. I wasn't, I wasn't really doing anything, and I can attribute that to not wanting to reach out to God.
Yeah. I did also want to ask, you had mentioned the bad experience with the on campus psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And you had also mentioned to me previously about having a more positive experience with a talk therapist.
Mm-hmm.
When did that happen?
So the talk therapist that didn't happen until I could afford it, because healthcare in the U.S. sucks. um, so way too late. Okay. So the talk therapist was great.
When did this start?
Like this was like about 6 months after I started my new job. Right after college.
Okay.
So at this point, I was really happy. Like, I was very content with the relationships I've made, the people that are around me, and I was just generally having fun. But at the same time, I was like, okay, there's some things I need to work through.
Okay.
Just to mature as a person.
So you just had this kind of innate sense that there was some stuff beneath the surface that needed examining.
Exactly. And that's when I talked with this talk therapist about everything that we just discussed and more. And that really helped. It opened up my eyes to the value of both empathy and stories themselves. Stories after that, like after I moved like from Dallas to Austin during the pandemic. After that, I went into every single interaction that I've ever made very differently, in the sense that I need to hear what someone has to say first before I like tell them what I have to say about that thing or like that topic.
Yeah. And how did you find this therapist?
This was online, so I was googling, like, I was I was very new to this. I had a psychiatrist before, but that was like university counseling,
Right.
and it was a whole different crappy process. But this is like I went online, literally Googled how to find a good therapist, and people suggested, oh, talk to a friend that has a therapist. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that.
Okay.
I can't go to a friend and be like, hey, you take therapy. This was before the pandemic, whenever therapy wasn't as big as it is now. So
Yeah.
I just can't do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just went online and people were like, oh yeah, these are like some therapists in your area that are rated like with this amount of stars. They have these reviews and stuff like that. And I found this one therapist that really kind of like kind of hit the nail on the head as far as like life experiences go. And I was like, I could probably relate to this person pretty well. And the thing that separated this therapist from like every other therapist I've seen or like every other psychiatrist I've seen is that she was willing to actually conversate about her life experiences
Right.
and try and relate that to me. And she was more of like a life coach in a sense. She would help me through like processing trauma, processing guilt, processing shame, all that kind of stuff. And the way she would do it is she would first tell me a similar situation that she's been in after I tell her like, "Oh yeah, this bothered me." Um and then she would tell me what she did, and then she would tell me like, what the not right response is, but what would be appropriate in my situation.
Yeah.
Like what would you do, Josh? And I would like we would kind of talk through like we call it like a mind map, like different scenarios that we could have taken.
Yeah.
And then we would pick from all of those scenarios like this is the best one.
And how long did you see that therapist for?
So it started in 2019, so just about all the way up until I moved. So I moved to Austin during the pandemic in I think April. Yeah, April 2020. And yeah.
It sounded like you had a very positive therapy experience. Is
Mhm.
that something that you think you might revisit, or do you think like it's just something you've drawn a line under?
Yeah, so it's actually something that's ongoing. It's not as frequent as it was before, but when things get tough, like when I'm really stressed, I'll reach out to not the therapist back in Dallas, but an online therapist, and I'll just like have a quick video conversation with them. Definitely not as personable, but it helps me kind of like it's like a coach for life.
Right.
So they help me through thinking about things, organizing things, and stuff like that. And I gotta say, it's definitely worth it. Even if someone thinks that it's therapy's like only for whenever you're down, that's not completely true. It's a great supplement to whenever you're up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're pretty close to wrapping up here. So I'm just curious, any closing thoughts or words of advice that you would give to people who are maybe going through something similar to what you experienced?
Yeah. So first, communication is key. If you feel like you're going through a tough time and it's hard to get words out or it's hard to explain how you're feeling, definitely at least try. Try to relate to the people that have gone through similar experiences. Chances are they had the same exact feeling that you had, and they have since like reflected on that, and they can tell you the results of that reflection, and that helps an immense uh, amount.
Yeah.
Besides that, if you're struggling with religion, I'm gonna say I'm still struggling with it too, but be open minded.
Yeah.
It is confusing, but I think that's the point of it.
Okay. Well, Joshua, I really appreciate you showing up today and sharing your story. I think this was a great episode that people can really learn a lot from. So I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been awesome. I honestly, I'm just really happy that I was able to share something with the world that might help other people. Yeah.
Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you.